Inauguration Day comes and goes without any of the turmoil that overtook the same venue 2 weeks before. We'll talk with Governor Whitmer about that and Job 1, which remains the pandemic. Also the latest from Dr. Janae Caldoun. And our roundtable on new beginnings. Today is Sunday, January 24th, 2021, and this is Flashpoint.
Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. 1 week ago today, January 17th, we were keeping a watchful eye on the Capitol buildings all over the country. The chatter had worry and a little menace hanging in the air, but that Sunday passed quietly. That moved the worry needle pointing to Wednesday, when we had such a massive presence of soldiers guarding Capitol Hill that some feared this most American of ceremonies wouldn't look all that American at all. But here again, tradition won out, giving us the expected helpings of poems, prayers, and promises. Even the walk on Pennsylvania Avenue was allowed to happen as the Bidens made their way to the White House. Now, I'm not skipping over all the irregularities. Certainly, we missed the crowds. The masked faces reminded us that we're neck deep in the virus crisis. And for the first time since 1869, the outgoing president skipped the swearing in of his successor. But there was an overwhelming sense of relief that violence and mayhem were kept at bay. And coming up this morning, my conversation with Governor Whitmer, who served as co-chair of the Presidential Inaugural Committee. I'll also ask about her plans now moving ahead on the pandemic, including the return of indoor dining for restaurants, which is scheduled to begin next Monday, February 1st. And we'll talk about vaccines with Dr. Janae Caldoun, a roundtable coming in on new starts, both in Washington and for one fellow named Kwame Kilpatrick. All today on Flashpoint. All right, let's start this morning with a quick conversation I got to have with Governor Whitmer on Wednesday. She was a co-chair of the Presidential Inaugural Committee, and this was just a few hours after Joe Biden became the nation's 46th president. I started by asking her if all of the restrictions that had to be put in place took anything away from the occasion.
No, not at all. Actually, as I watched and as I communicated with loved ones who were watching on television safely from home, it was as powerful a moment for every one of us. We were tuned in. We were overwhelmed with pride and emotion when Vice President Harris went up to take her oath. Sitting there watching it with my two daughters was just it was really an incredible moment, and I know that so many people felt that around our country and around the globe. We have a lot of work ahead of us. There won't be a honeymoon for them as there are for many incoming administrations. They got to get right to work, and they know it, and they are determined, and I think they're surrounding themselves with an incredible team that will make sure we're successful in eradicating the virus, getting people back to work, getting kids back to school, and preparing us for economic strength.
Yeah, you know, I want to ask you more about that in just a minute, but before I do, give me an idea after what we saw 2 weeks ago, the events not only at the U.S. Capitol, but the worries that we had at capitals all over the country. Give me an idea, now that we're past this big moment, give me an idea of where your worry level was on a scale of 1 to 10, that something untoward might happen.
Well, I was most concerned about Sunday. The kind of briefings that we were getting from the FBI and federal law enforcement agencies were very concerning. I know that there was a lot of concern about 3 capitals in the nation, and ours was one of them. And so we took it very seriously and did the preparations. And lo and behold, we did not get inundated by, kind of the groups that we were concerned about. And had we would have been prepared. But I think that we have to do our due diligence and make preparations, because people of our country have seen and bore witness and experienced a lot of domestic terrorism in the last 12 months, and most recently perpetrated on our U.S. Capitol. And I wanted to make sure nothing like that played out at our state capitol this week. And we're fortunate in that none did. People are safe, and we were able to keep the peace.
So you were at a 7, an 8?
Sure. I was on the higher range, that's for sure. And, I'm a pretty stoic person. I've been through a lot in this last 12 months. We as a nation have been through a lot. We as a state have been through a lot. I'm not complaining. I know my burden is lighter than many. So I don't complain, but I also, I don't react strongly. I think I'm a little seasoned now in that regard. And so I was pretty concerned, though, going into this past weekend. And I'm glad that we are in the position that we are.
You know, there is this reality, though, that as much as you enjoyed the inauguration, there were a lot of Americans who had the opposite reaction. We remain a very divided nation. What is your prescriptive for that? What do we do? We see it, of course, in Michigan right now.
Yeah, no question. Well, I think who's at the top really matters. 2 weeks ago, when we saw the violence breaking out of the U.S. Capitol, it was being egged on and encouraged by the person who was, sitting in the White House. That's very clear. Even Mitch McConnell has acknowledged that fact. Now we have someone in the White House who is going to do everything he can to bring calm and focus and determination and unity to this nation. It won't happen overnight, but I do think that he is going to be calling on people's better angels, and we'll find a lot of people who are ready to lock arms with him, who are not traditional allies.
Well, then let me ask you now about the pandemic, because as I say, if you're a Democrat, the good news is you now control all three levers of government. The bad news is you now control all three levers of government. There's no one else to blame. It's all on you. This is kind of an aircraft carrier. It doesn't exactly turn on a dime. So we got a lot of problems right now with getting the vaccine distributed. How quickly do you think we can create a new footing for moving forward against the pandemic?
Well, they've been getting prepared since they were declared the victors of the presidential election. And so it's been a couple of months that they've been working diligently to ensure that they've got a plan they can implement on day one. As someone that's been close to the president, our administration is one with whom they've been conferring regularly, whether it is on what we need to get people back to work and to help small businesses, including restaurants, as one example, or it is getting our kids back in school, or it is getting our arms around this pandemic. Michigan has been sharing and helping form what their plans are for day one. You use an airline carrier as your analogy. I liken things to a locomotive, right? It's hard and it's bumpy and it's jerky at the beginning, but we are picking up steam. What we need is regular, predictable access to vaccines. I believe this administration will buy every vaccine they can get their hands on and get them to the states as quickly as possible. I think that we will see a dramatic improvement on that in the coming days and weeks. And so we will be moving a lot faster and it'll be a lot smoother. But there's no question this has been more difficult than I think it should have been, knowing this was coming for 10 months and still not having a national strategy. But now that we have a Biden administration, I think that's going to change dramatically pretty quickly.
You know, I've already had some people getting in touch with me saying, yeah, now the governor wants to reopen the economy. Now she wants to open restaurants on February 1st. She didn't want to do that when Trump was president. She wants to do it now. The pandemic is worse, but she wants to reopen the economy now that Joe Biden is president. Why aren't they right about that?
That's not accurate at all. In fact, if you look at Michigan's numbers with COVID, you can see that we are in a stronger position than any other Midwestern state. This pause that we took in Michigan has worked, and we're in a much stronger position. Our hospitals did not get overwhelmed. Some of our neighboring states, they won't do non-emergent surgeries. You remember last spring when we had to say if it's non-emergent, you can't do the surgery, because we needed to conserve PPE. We needed to keep the number of people in our hospitals down so that we didn't see extra spread of COVID. We're not in that position now. Non-emergent surgeries are happening in all of our hospitals because we have kept the numbers down because of this pause. So we're in a stronger position. We can start re-engaging some things, and largely our economy has been open for the better part of the last 8 months. There's just indoor dining that is one of the last things to come online, and it's not the restaurant's fault. It's just how this virus spreads. But now we're in a much stronger position, and we're looking to moving forward even in that space.
All right, that was Governor Whitmer from Washington on Wednesday. Let's stay with the pandemic response now with the state's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Janae Caldoun, who joins us again from Lansing. Dr. Caldoun, good to talk to you again. Bring me up to date on where you feel we are right now with our vaccine response. Clearly, I think everybody would allow that it was bumpy rolling it out in Michigan. We seemed behind the rest of the country. We've caught up a bit. Where's your confidence level in where we are at the moment?
You know, I think it was bumpy, quite frankly, across the entire country when it comes to the vaccine rollout. I'm quite pleased with the progress we've made in Michigan. We've, because of the work of our local health departments, our hospitals, our pharmacies, we are getting shots in arms. We've gone up, as you indicated, more than 20 spots when it comes to comparing us to other states and the percent of our population that's been vaccinated. So I'm quite pleased with our response.
When we look at we kind of put out a chart of when people can expect to get it, and if you're not in that upper sort of tier of either the elderly, pre-existing conditions, healthcare workers, all of that. If you're just sort of a normal Michigander, that looks really daunting to think it may be August. Is that expectation management, or do you think that is really how long it's going to take to get these out?
I'll tell you, I'm quite frustrated. We simply don't have enough vaccines in the state of Michigan. We've been in conversation with the Biden administration. I know they're doing everything they can to make sure every state has access to every vaccine that's available. But unfortunately, right now, there's simply not enough available, even for the people who are currently eligible under our guidelines. So we want everyone who would like to be vaccinated to get that. But unfortunately, at this time, people will have to be patient until we get more vaccine into the state.
The other thing that is, I think we're starting to realize, and we've known that this was going to be a really complicating factor all along, but the fact that for most of these so far, we're still waiting on Johnson & Johnson, but that these are a two vaccine protocol, we're starting to appreciate how cumbersome that is, aren't we?
Absolutely. I mean, the entire the logistics of the operation are quite cumbersome. The Pfizer vaccine has to be stored at these ultra cold temperatures. You have to manage scheduling 2 different doses. We don't want people just showing up without an appointment. So all of these things make it very complex. And it's partly why, to be honest with you, it's been a little bit bumpy when it comes to rolling out these vaccines.
The other thing of us trying to sort of have these layers of who should get it first and who shouldn't is also going to lead inevitably to people. We get these reports every once in a while about somebody trying to jump the line, or somebody's got enough money that they can find a way to get the vaccine. Should we spend a lot of time worried about people hopping the line, or should our focus just be on let's get the shot into as many people as we can?
I'll say that equity is incredibly important. That's why we've moved forward with our essential workers, those working on the front lines, those who are age 65 and up. We don't have vaccine police that are checking everyone to make sure they're not jumping in front of someone else. And I can say that, there's no shot that goes in an arm is wasted at this point. No one is immune, and so every shot is a good shot. That said, we are really working with our local health departments, driving forward equity, reaching vulnerable populations, and making sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to get this vaccine.
Lastly, I mentioned the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is a one-shot protocol. It still has not been approved for emergency use, but if and when it is, how much of a game changer would that be?
I think it will be a little bit of a game changer. Again, I've been in conversations with the Biden administration. I don't know how much of that particular vaccine would be available to us, but again, any additional vaccine would be welcome. We also don't have the data yet as far as how effective it may be and in what population. So we'll continue to look at that. And when they, apply for their EUA, we'll look at that data and determine how to best move forward.
A long, long way to go, obviously, for us. Dr. Janae Caldoon, we so appreciate the update. We'll talk to you again soon. Stay safe.
You as well.
You bet. All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll bring the roundtable in right after this. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
Visit GullingBloomfield.com and lease or buy your next vehicle online. Only at Gulling Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram in Bloomfield Hills. During the Start Something New sales event, take off in the 2021 Ram 1500 Bighorn Quad Cab 4x4 for only $269 a month employee, $319 friends and family. Or lease the 2021 Ram 1500 Bighorn Crew Cab 4x4, now just $289 a month employee, $339 friends and family. You search, you request, we deliver to your home or office. Shop GullingBloomfield.com. Gulling Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram in Bloomfield Hills.
We are all experiencing history in the making.
We start with the release of Kwame Kilpatrick.
The sentence has been commuted.
High schoolers returning to the classroom for many districts.
I think our mental health is going to improve.
And now to the latest involving the coronavirus.
Inauguration Day in Washington.
And that they will officially take office.
These are morning moments that will be remembered and discussed. Thank you for trusting Local 4 News today to bring them to you.
How did Suburban Ford become the largest retailer of new and pre-owned vehicles in America? We're the only Ford dealer in Metro Detroit with 3 convenient locations.
Whether you're near M59 in Waterford,
or near Woodward and 8 Mile in friendly Ferndale,
or on the east side at 17.5 in Van Dyke and Sterling Heights. We have 3 times the inventory, earn huge factory discounts, and pass that savings on to you. Go to drivesuburbanford.com, start browsing thousands of vehicles, click Express Store, and start pricing your car your way. Drivesuburbanford.com, save time, save money.
All right, let's bring in this morning's roundtable. Good to have with us Portia Roberson, CEO of Focus Hope, that you see up there on the upper right. Sandy Barua is head of the Detroit Regional Chamber, cat a corner from her. Political consultant and political strategist Mario Moro, above him, is here. And the former majority leader of the Michigan Senate, Randy Richardville, there on the lower right. Of course, on the right. Randy, I want to start with you, a supporter of President Trump's. Can we start anew? Is there anything you think to this talk of that you heard in the inaugural speech and a lot of the talk afterwards about bringing us all back together, or are we just stuck in our corners for some time now?
Oh, it's up to us individually, I think. I mean, I had a person from England send me an email the other day that said, we need some kind of a Gandhi-like leader here. And I said, you know what we need is we need better mirrors, because it starts at home. You know, we don't need somebody in Washington to tell us how to feel, how to act, how to behave. We had a bad example of that for 4 years. I think most of you know that I supported President Trump. I believed a lot of his policies, and I was sick and tired of listening to him talk. I hated the way that he tweeted people. I hated the way he treated people. And I'm glad that part of the presidency is gone. Now we'll have to see if this new group, new leadership, and by the way, the fact that they have the House and the Senate leaning in their direction too, let's see if they do something different, more maybe Clinton-esque than what happened when Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid took over. I think the pendulum swung too far to the left, and then you saw a whole bunch of people scattered to the right. So I'm hoping they stay somewhat close to the middle, maybe a little more right than you would expect.
I'm going to have T-shirts made up that say we need better mirrors. I love that idea. But Portia, the first test comes then as to whether or not you go ahead and go through with impeaching former President Trump now, which might not help build that bridge.
Yeah, but I think Republicans realize how much they need to do this in order to just clear the Republican Party of Donald Trump. I mean, nobody, I think, really wants him to remain the face of the party. Nobody? And so I think it's going to move forward. We see now that Mitch McConnell is in support of it. He's sort of quietly managing his troops to get behind it. And I think it's really because we've seen the disaster that turned out to be Donald Trump. I mean, to the very end, he turned out to be somebody who was a lightning rod for this country. And when you talk about whether or not we can regroup, I think, you know, the president and the vice president have shown that they want to be conciliatory. They want to work together. They do not want to go in and have to do a tie buster every time they have a vote come up. They really want to try and work with folks. And I think, you know, the relationship that the president has with the people who have been in the Senate for a long time will help him do that. But I certainly think that they're going to try and move forward with this impeachment trial and get him impeached.
Sandy, as much as I love Portia, I'm not sure that you or others would agree that that everyone wants Trump gone. I think there's a lot of Republicans who still see him as very central to the strength of the party.
Yeah, if I were in studio with Portia, I would agree with her, obviously. But since I'm safely at home, I am going to disagree with my friend Portia. And here's why. Donald Trump's support within what remains of the Republican Party, and I think that's an important point. The Republican Party is very different today than it was 6 years ago and certainly 15 years ago, is well into the 70% range. So there is still those kind of handcuffs to Trump that still exists. So I wish she were right, but I think when you look at the idea of impeachment, and I think it's famously known that, you know, I'm a Republican, but I'm not a supporter of former President Trump's, is that impeachment, when you look at the historical example of Gerald Ford pardoning Richard Nixon, that was highly controversial at the time, highly critical at the criticized at the time. Yep. But in retrospect, we look at that as very much the right decision for the country to move on. I think there's a lesson there with Michigander Jerry Ford in terms of how we move forward and how we kind of, you know, start that process of healing our nation. I think we have the right man in Joe Biden to start that healing process. I think we have the, you know, history kind of shined on us because he's the right temperament. Let's take advantage of that.
Mario, what are your thoughts? As I said to the governor earlier, it's good news, bad news. If you got one party in control, it's all on you now. How do you expect them to manage this majority and this moment that they have?
I think the Democrats have been waiting for this moment for a while now. We all have suffered, both Republicans, Democrats, and independents, under President Trump. As far as impeachment goes, I think that, you do the crime, you do the time, as it relates to bringing some reality back to what's going on in this country. What he did was unacceptable and unexcusable. And I don't think we can get away with it. I don't think the Republicans realize what a danger Donald Trump has been for them for the last 4 years and will be for years to come if he is successful in creating the Patriot Party. And what he does is, by creating that Patriot Party, is pretty much dismantling the entire Republican Party for years to come. Somewhat reflective on what happened with the Tea Party back a few years back.
Randy, what do you want to see happen there? Is that foolhardy, a fool's errand, to keep going after President Trump after he's out? Or is that the right thing? As Mario said, if you do the crime, you do the time.
Well, I guess we have to talk about Kwame Kilpatrick at this time if we want to talk about doing the crime and the time and all that stuff. But no, I don't think it makes any sense at all to continue this. Why don't we just let this go forward? If the president and the current vice president say we want to move forward and be reconciliatory, why don't we do that then and leave this impeachment thing go? Don't we have more important things to do? And what is Donald Trump going to do without that continued emphasis on what he has to say as being so central to a small group of people? There are a lot of us out there, Sandy included, that are conservative, that believe in business. We think that there are a lot of things that can be done with this administration working together. Let's move forward instead of moving backward. That's what I would say.
Portia?
Yeah, I just think there's some significant differences, even when you talk about the example of Nixon and Gerald Ford. I mean, Nixon actually left office because he knew that he, was facing this sort of this impeachment process. I think, if we had seen any of that from Donald Trump, instead what we saw is an insurrection at the Capitol. And let's not forget that there were a ton of Republicans who were in danger during that time. So I think this is a little bit more significant than somebody who just espoused opinions that we didn't agree with or tweeted more than we would have liked. This was something that he encouraged, and it happened. It put a lot of people in danger. It subsequently resulted in the death of over 5 or 6 people. So I think it's a little disingenuous to say, let's just move forward. Because another thing is, sometimes in order to move forward and ask people for forgiveness, you have to actually hold people's feet to the fire for what they've done. And I think in this case, we're constantly asking folks to just forgive and move forward, and nobody ever pays for what they've done. In this case, the president has to pay a little bit.
Mario, let me let you now get back to the remark you were trying to make there when Randy brought up Kwame Kilpatrick.
Yeah, and I apologize, Randy, for interrupting you. It's not my style. But what my point was is that, we can't keep bringing up apples and oranges. What President Trump did, again, was unexcusable and unacceptable. And he has to be held accountable. He was the leader of the free world, the president of the United States. And for Republicans, independents or Democrats, who are following him in these misdeeds, we just we're going to get along. We got to get along with doing the right thing. And let's start by doing the right thing. Supporting President Biden, but holding President Trump accountable for his actions.
Mario, you got any thoughts on the release of Kwame Kilpatrick? Should we be thinking at all about what kind of future he has ahead of him, or do we just let that dog go to sleep?
No, basically, to be honest with you, I'm happy that he got out to spend time with his family. I thought 28 years was excessive. I thought that, he did wrong. He's paid the price for it. The president at the time released him. Let him move on and do his job. I don't think he's coming back to Detroit to run for office and all this other speculation that's out there. Let the man live his life and move on.
Sandy, wrap it up for us.
So I'm just going to say, go back to the impeachment question again. The reason why, again, I agree completely with the crimes that Donald Trump has committed. But look at this conversation. We have a brand new president. We have a brand new vice president. We have this new opportunity to move forward in a new way. And we've spent a bulk of this conversation talking about the former president. That is not what I want for our country moving forward. I agree that what has happened is beyond reprehensible, huge American damage. But let's take advantage of this unique moment in time with, frankly, what I consider to be a unique leader, the right man at the right time for our country to move us forward.
And I got to get the Flashpoint economy back on track. I got to get to a break. Gang, thanks so much for the time. We'll continue with more in just a minute.
Always there for you. Come experience the Gowling difference at Gowling Alfa Romeo of Birmingham.
Shop with us online at Alfa Romeo of Birmingham.com for incredible offers from the comfort and safety of your home. For a limited time, lease a 2020 Alfa Romeo Giulia for just $279 a month. Or take home the 2020 Alfa Romeo Stelvio for $329 a month. Don't wait. Visit Alfa Romeo of Birmingham.com today.
A mysterious murder at a local business, and then...
You're stunned that this happened again at the same place 5 days later. These individuals were definitely targeted.
But were both the target, or did the shooters miss their mark the first time? Monday morning at 6:30, go inside this 3-year-old cold case and find out.
What the detectives see in surveillance video that tells them somebody else besides the shooters knows what happened.
Monday on Local 4 News Today.
I think Wayne County Community College District is the perfect place for any student.
We are all a big melting pot and sharing different experiences.
Everyone was really friendly and they're giving you their time.
I know someone here will always be there to support me.
Armenalda Carrick, Bosnia.
Sandra Gonzalez, Mexico.
Minhas Jakia, Bangladesh.
Dennis Carrick, Bosnia and Herzegovina.
You'll notice the roundtable did not spend very much time there talking about Kwame Kilpatrick. They told me in the break that's exactly how they wanted it. They're moving on. Thanks so much for being here this morning. Meet the Press coming up next. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Flashpoint.